Has it ever happened to someone who simply disappeared from your life without any logical explanation? Maybe that friend who walked away without warning, or a relationship that ended suddenly. It may even have been someone you trusted a lot and who let you down. And then there's the pain, the confusion, the inevitable question, why did this happen to me? But what if this isn't a punishment? What if it is God, with his infinite wisdom, taking you away from something that you don't yet understand, but that he has already seen is not good for you? Today, you will discover how God acts in silence, how he often takes people out of our path, out of love, out of protection, even when we don't understand it at the time. You will learn to identify the signs. You will realize that not every separation is a loss. Sometimes it is a deliverance. And if you stay with me until the end of this video, you will leave with more serenity, discernment, and with renewed faith not to run after what God has already removed from your path. Now tell me, have you ever been through this and, over time, understood that it was the best thing that could have happened? Right here in the comments, now I see it was taken care of, and also include the name of your city. I want to see how far this message will reach. If this reflection is speaking to you, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is a breath of faith to remind you that God never abandons you, even when his silence seems difficult to understand. Let's see together the signs of divine care, even in unexpected separations. Sometimes the people closest to us disappear without leaving any answers. They move away, cut ties, and all that's left is a screaming silence. There was no fight, no convincing explanation, just the emptiness of the one who's gone and the pain of the one who's left. You try to understand, look for reasons, go back to old messages, replay entire conversations in your head like someone watching a movie looking for where everything went wrong. But you find nothing, only questions without an answer. And it's in this scenario of uncertainty that one of the greatest anguishes of the soul arises. Did I do something wrong? Why did this person leave like that? This is when many people feel guilty, anxious, and rejected. You start to doubt your worth. You start to wonder if you should have been different, more understanding, less intense, stronger. But what if I told you that this absence that hurts you today could be the very thing that is saving you from something much worse in the future? What if this disappearance is not a punishment, but a protection? The absence of explanations does not always mean that you have failed. Sometimes it means that God has intervened, because what you have not seen, he has already seen. What you have not understood, he has already understood. There are people who cross our path with smiles on their faces, sweet words, promises of partnership, love, and complicity. But behind the charm, there are intentions that do not match God's plans for your life. And you, in your pure heart, may not realize it. But God does. He sees what the eyes do not see. He listens to conversations that you have never heard. He knows the hearts, the most secret thoughts, the paths that were being traced without your knowledge. The Bible tells us the story of Joseph, a young man loved by his father, rejected by his brothers. He was sold into slavery, betrayed by his own family. To human eyes, everything seemed wrong. It seemed like abandonment, injustice. But God used that separation to prepare Joseph for something greater. God took him to Egypt, where he would become governor and save an entire nation from famine. What seemed like betrayal was, in fact, a transition, a necessary break to reposition Joseph in his purpose. Maybe this is what you are experiencing. A separation that seems unfair, cruel, senseless, but that in fact is a divine movement to reposition you. God does remove people from our lives, and he doesn't always give us details, because if he did, we might not accept it. Maybe we would insist on keeping what was no longer meant to remain. Sometimes it is in God's silence that he shouts the loudest. He doesn't need to justify his protection. He simply acts. You no longer need to run after answers that only make you bleed, nor stay stuck in assumptions that only hurt you. Sometimes the answer lies in deliverance, and you will only understand later. Today, everything seems confusing, but time will show you that what came out to set you free. And when you finally see what God spared you, you will be thankful for the absence, you will praise for the loss, you will glorify for the door that closed, not with anger, but with peace. And if you pay close attention, you may have seen this happen before. People who have left your life and now you understand why. Ties that have been broken and now you are grateful. Sometimes what looks like a wound is just the mark of the surgery that saved your soul. And the doctor who operated was God, silent, precise, loving. He loves you so much that he will not allow people to remain where there is danger to your spirit. This realization changes everything. It changes the way you see the past. It changes the way you face silences. It changes the way you respond to absences. You begin to understand that instead of running after those who left, maybe it's time to run to God. He is the only one who knows what you don't yet know. And if he allowed this separation, it's because something greater is being prepared. Perhaps without realizing it, you have prayed for peace. And God has answered by taking away what was causing war. Maybe you have asked to be happy, and he has removed what was stopping you from smiling. Maybe you have asked for clarity, and he has removed what was confusing you. God is an expert in answering prayers with decisions that we do not yet understand. But everything has a purpose. Nothing happens by chance. And when you understand this, even pain finds a place in hope. The heart begins to reorganize itself, no longer searching for those who left, but welcoming those who stayed. God, he remains, he cares, he guards, and above all, he protects. Even when you don't understand, even when it seems unfair, even when it hurts. And as you accept this, the weight begins to lift off your shoulders. Your chest begins to breathe more lightly. And you realize that even if you lack people, you will never lack God. Danger does not always come with a dark face or harsh words. Often, what threatens our peace the most comes disguised as light. These are people who present themselves with kindness, offer help, walk by our side, talk about God, share their pain, and little by little, without us realizing it, they infiltrate our emotions. They create bonds, inspire trust, and show themselves to be indispensable. But behind the facade, there is something that does not come from God. Not every hug is sincere. Not every compliment is true. Not every companionship is loyal. And this is hard to accept, because our soul wants to believe in the goodness of others. It wants to believe that people are just like us. And this is the trap. The enemy does not present himself as an enemy. He disguises himself as comfort, as welcome, even as spirituality. He knows how to use sweet words. He knows how to play the victim. He knows how to build trust like someone who sets a slow trap. And before you know it, you are already involved, dependent, emotionally tied to someone who is not who they seem to be. This is why we often feel betrayed, deceived, and confused. Because the image we had built of a person was beautiful, but their essence was different, and we didn't realize this at first. The Bible warns us, Satan masquerades as an angel of light, 2 Corinthians 11:14. This means that evil often presents itself in the form of good. It doesn't come with a dangerous face. It comes with the appearance of help, empathy, and understanding. Therefore, discernment is more important than judging by appearances. Judas walked with Jesus. He was at the side of the Son of God. He saw miracles, heard eternal words, participated in sacred moments. But his heart was not with Christ. He was a living example that not every close presence is loyal. Judas kissed Jesus on the cheek to betray him. This is one of the strongest symbols of falsehood, the kiss of betrayal. The demonstration of affection that hides the intention of destruction. Many people live surrounded by Judas kisses without realizing it. They feel safe around people who are, in fact, just waiting for the right moment to pull the rug out from under them. This can happen in friendships, romantic relationships, at work, and even within their own family. It's not an exaggeration, it's a spiritual reality. And God, who sees beyond what you see, often acts firmly to remove these people before the evil comes to fruition. But we, full of feelings, try to hold on. We try to fix what was born crooked. We try to maintain bonds that God has already signaled should be broken, and the more we insist, the more we suffer. The separation that was supposed to be protection turns into prolonged suffering, because when God takes away and you insist on keeping it, the pain becomes discipline. And not because God punishes, but because the attachment to what he wanted to remove turns into a prison. The problem is that we often trust our emotional intuition more than our spiritual discernment. We judge people by what they show rather than by what they carry. And the enemy knows this. He is in no hurry. He plants his seeds little by little. He creates intimacy, dependence, and bonds, until when he acts, you are already too vulnerable to react. That's why we need to pray for discernment. Ask God for spiritual eyes to see beyond words, beyond charisma, beyond what appears, because what appears is not always what it is. And the Holy Spirit can show signs, a restlessness, an inexplicable discomfort, a detail that doesn't fit, a dream that leaves the soul on alert. Don't ignore it. God speaks, and when he warns, it's because he's watching over you. If you've ever been through this, you know the feeling. You feel cheated, embarrassed, used, but you don't have to carry the guilt. It wasn't you who trusted who made the mistake. The one who deceived was the one who made the mistake. And yet, God still transforms your pain into deliverance. What was disappointment can become revelation. The truth, when it arrives, hurts, but later it heals and frees and protects. And do you know what's most incredible? It's that even when you don't realize it, even when you don't want to accept it, even when you're too attached to let go, God still intervenes. Because his love for you is greater than your resistance. He knows that certain presences, no matter how pleasant they may seem, are draining your strength, undermining your faith, diverting your focus. And out of love, he will act. He will remove. He will expose. He will break. Don't be alarmed when seemingly healthy bonds suddenly fall apart. It may not have been healthy at all. It may have been evil disguised as good. And God, with his grace, simply unmasked it. Sometimes what broke for no reason was already rotten inside, and God only allowed it to fall before it hurt you more deeply. So instead of trying to fix what was broken, maybe it's time to ask God, what are you trying to show me? Because when you open yourself to that answer, your perspective changes. Fear gives way to discernment, and pain gives way to peace. There are times when heaven seems closed. You pray, you cry, you ask for direction, and all you get is silence. No clear answers, no obvious revelation. And that hurts, because God's silence can be more distressing than any no. It's in those times that our hearts struggle the most. We want to understand why certain people left, why a deep friendship suddenly fell apart, why that relationship ended just when it seemed strongest, and God remains silent. It is at this time that many feel abandoned by him. But God's silence is not absence. It is strategy. It is protection. It is disguised intervention. What seems like abandonment is actually a subtle form of guidance. Because if God explained to us everything he is doing, perhaps we would resist. Perhaps we would try to prevent what he has already decreed as necessary. So he acts in silence to preserve the work that is being built. Job is a profound example of this. He lost everything, his children, his wealth, his health, and for long chapters, all he receives is silence from God. Meanwhile, he is surrounded by useless advice, cruel judgments, and unanswered questions. But even in silence, God was there. He allowed each event to happen for a greater purpose, and in the end, he restored everything twofold. Sometimes, silence is the bridge between pain and restitution. When someone is removed from your life without explanation, you have two options: cling to the absence, trying to find answers that will not come, or trust in silence as a sign of protection. There are people who, if they remained by your side, would destroy your peace little by little. not blatantly, but with subtle manipulation, words that corrode, attitudes that weaken your identity. And God, seeing what you do not yet see, takes it away before you realize the damage. But our hearts are reluctant. They want answers. They want to understand. But God doesn't always work with explanations. He works with deliverances. He doesn't have to justify what he does, because he knows what's ahead. He's already seen the future. He's already seen what you're still trying to decipher. And when he chooses to be silent, it's not because he's absent. It's because he's acting on a level that your mind can't yet reach. There are times when heaven is working so deeply for you that the only thing you feel is silence. Because if you knew what was behind that person who left, if you saw what God saw, you wouldn't ask for explanations. You would kneel down in thanks. But since you don't know yet, your heart suffers. And that's human. The pain of absence still hurts, even when it's protection. But the more you mature spiritually, the more you begin to realize that God's silence also speaks. He speaks healing. He speaks deliverance. He speaks strategy. When God is silent, he is saying, trust. This is not the time to understand. It is the time to remain. And it is in this remaining that you are polished. It is in waiting that you are molded. It is in not knowing that faith grows. Because believing when everything is clear is easy, but trusting in the dark is proof of maturity. That's why when someone leaves without leaving an explanation, instead of running after the person, run to God. Ask less why and more what for. Because the purpose is always more important than the reason. And sometimes the subject is invisible now, but the purpose will shine brightly in the future. God is never late. He never makes mistakes. He never gets confused. And if he allowed the separation, even in silence, it is because it was necessary. Maybe that friendship would lead you astray. Maybe that romance would distance you from your identity. Maybe that partnership would destroy you financially, and you would only realize it when it was too late. But God saw it first, and he acted with precision, in silence, as only he knows how to do. That is why we need to learn to trust in what God does, even when we do not understand what he allows. The lack of noise does not always mean the absence of action. On the contrary, the deeper God moves, the quieter the operation. Like a surgeon who works in total silence during a delicate operation, God also works in our soul with millimeter precision. Every cut is calculated. Every removal has a reason, every loss meaning. And you don't need to see it to believe it. You need to believe it so that one day you'll understand it. The time will come when everything will make sense. The pieces will fit together. Wounds will turn into testimonies. And the voids left by people will give way to new directions, new bonds, new beginnings. So when God is silent, don't despair. Listen to the silence. He is saying more than 1,000 words could ever say. And remember, God's silence is never indifference. It is care in the form of calm. It is deliverance in the form of time. It is love in the form of protection. The first feeling that invades the heart when someone leaves without warning is pain. A dull, lonely pain, difficult to explain. It doesn't matter if it was a friend, a partner, a family member. When there is a bond, the break hurts. And the soul reacts as if something had been ripped away by force. You feel the emptiness. You feel the absence in the details, in the times when you used to talk, in the routines that were undone, in the memories that now weigh heavily. And in this painful space, the temptation arises to believe that everything is going wrong, that you are losing, being rejected, discarded. But what if this pain is, in fact, the beginning of something new? What if this cut, however deep it may be, is the first step in a healing process? There comes a time in our spiritual life when God decides to intervene not only around us, but within us. And to do so, he begins by removing what is preventing our healing. People who distract us, who feed old wounds, who reinforce patterns that need to be broken. God gets straight to the point. He doesn't anesthetize, he cuts. And the cut, like any surgical process, hurts. But there is one principle in the kingdom that never fails. God does not cut to hurt. He cuts to heal. Jesus said, "He prunes every branch that bears fruit, so that it will bear more fruit." John 15:2. Pruning is painful. It seems like loss, but it is actually preparation for greater growth. The farmer does not prune because he rejects the plant. He prunes because he wants it to flourish more, and so it is with us. There are people who, if they remained in our lives, would prevent us from blossoming, not because they are bad in essence, but because they carry a weight that no longer fits with the next cycle that God is preparing. Perhaps they were important in the past. Perhaps they were part of beautiful moments, but now their time is up. They are preventing you from growing. They are suffocating your roots. But the heart doesn't understand this right away. It cries, it resists, it wants the comfort of familiarity, even if that familiarity brings stagnation. It wants to keep close what it knows, even if it no longer does any good. And that's where faith needs to come in. Faith to accept the cut, faith to trust in the pain, faith to believe that what seems like loss is a process. Think of an infected wound. Sometimes you need to open it up more, clean it from the inside, remove everything that is contaminating it so that true healing can take place. The cut is part of the treatment. If you avoid it, if you try to hide it, if you pretend you don't need it, the infection spreads. This is how it is with the bonds that God decides to break. On the outside, everything may seem fine, but on the inside, there is something slowly rotting. And God, with his loving gaze, decides to intervene before it gets worse. Yes, it hurts to see someone leave. It hurts to feel replaced, ignored, forgotten. But even more painful would be to continue to be tied to someone who in the future would be a source of emotional or spiritual destruction. God sees what is coming. He knows what that person will become. He knows what you are not yet mature enough to face. So he cuts you off first. And yes, this may seem harsh, but it is a care that saves. And over time, you realize that the pain of the cut was not in vain. It was necessary, it was sacred, it was the beginning of reconstruction. Just as an old house needs to be demolished before it can be renovated, certain bonds need to be undone before your life can reach the new one that God has prepared. And this is not ingratitude, it is spiritual maturity. It's understanding that although some people have been blessings in the past, they can become obstacles in the present. And God's love for you is so great that he won't allow you to be stuck in yesterday while tomorrow awaits you. That's why he cuts. That's why he separates. That's why he breaks. And yes, he allows it to hurt. Because pain wakes us up. Pain makes us reflect. Pain takes us out of automatic mode. And after it fulfills its role, healing comes, relief comes, clarity comes. You begin to see that without that bond, life flows better. Prayers gain more strength, the mind becomes lighter, the heart begins to breathe again. This is the divine cycle, cutting, hurting, healing, growing. God does not waste wounds. Each one has a purpose. Each tear has a direction. And when you surrender to this process, when you stop resisting and start trusting, everything begins to change. So, if you are in the midst of this pain right now, breathe, trust. You are not being punished. You are being healed. It may take time, it may seem unfair, but you will look back and understand it was necessary. And even if you don't understand everything now, know that God is present at every stage. He does not abandon you in the cut. He accompanies you until complete healing. There was a time when Lucas believed he had found the love of his life, the kind of relationship that, to the outside world, seemed perfect. Smiles in photos, public declarations, complicity in the little things. But inside, he carried a constant restlessness. There was jealousy disguised as care, control disguised as protection, guilt hidden between the lines. Lucas tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just a phase, that love conquers everything, that no one is perfect. But over time, what was uncomfortable became exhaustion. What was passion became dependence, and what seemed like love was prison. Even so, he persisted. He prayed for change. He asked God to restore, to transform. He made promises, fasted, cried alone at night, praying for things to work out. Not because he was happy, but because he was afraid of being alone, afraid of losing, afraid of starting over. Lucas was more attached to the idea of what it represented than to the truth of what he was experiencing. Until suddenly she left. A cold message, a cutting silence, and nothing more. The ground disappeared. He felt as if something had been forcibly ripped out of him. He tried to understand. He tried to go back. He tried to justify. But the more he tried, the more he realized that the door was closed, not just by her, but by God. At first, he couldn't accept it. He thought God was silent. But today, looking back, he understands that God was acting. Silently, yes, but with precision, removing what was preventing him from breathing, from growing, from hearing his voice clearly. Because while that person was the center of Lucas's life, God was in the background. Prayers were directed at maintaining the relationship, not at seeking intimacy with the Father. Faith was becoming a tool for emotional control, and no longer a sincere communion. God knew, and so he intervened. Of course, the process was painful. Lucas spent months rebuilding himself. He had emotional setbacks, sleepless nights, and identity crises. He wondered if he was still worthy of love, if he still had value, if he would be able to start over. But it was in this desert that he found God's presence again. He began to pray, not to recover, but to understand. He began to seek not the return of the person, but the renewal of the soul. And there, God began to heal. And when he least expected it, he realized that he was breathing differently, that the days no longer hurt as much, that his thoughts were clearer, that his prayers flowed with more sincerity. What he thought was love was an emotional dependence, and what seemed like loss was liberation. God had closed a door that, if left open, would destroy the identity he was building in Lucas. This story, like so many others, is repeated in the lives of many, of people who get involved in relationships, friendships, or partnerships that on the outside seem like blessings, but on the inside are chains. And when these chains break, the heart cries, but the spirit is relieved, because deep down, God was there all along, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The Bible tells us the story of the demon-possessed man of Gadara, a man who lived in prison, isolated, hurting himself, and was rejected by everyone. He no longer had an identity. He was dominated by voices that did not come from God, until Jesus arrived. And the first thing you did was to free him. You cast out that which was imprisoning him, that which no one could see clearly. And only after this liberation did the man come to his senses, get dressed, sit up, and be recognized as a person again. Mark 5:1-15. This is the essence of divine deliverance. It does not come with explanations. It comes with authority. God steps in and removes what needs to go, even if it hurts, even if it seems abrupt, even if it confuses at first. Because only after the removal does recognition come. Only after the cut does we see who we really are again. Luke, like the man from Gadara, needed to lose what imprisoned him in order to regain his identity. And perhaps you need to too. Maybe what you call love is actually a spiritual prison. Maybe that right friendship is taking you away from who you really are in God. Maybe you are trapped in something that shines on the outside but destroys you on the inside. And if that's the case, the separation is not a tragedy. It's a miracle. It's an answer to a prayer you didn't even know you were praying. And when you start to see it that way, the pain changes location. It doesn't go away, but it has a purpose. It becomes part of the rebirth. And you slowly begin to understand that God didn't take something away from you. He took you away from something. If this message spoke to you, if you understand that some losses are in fact deliverances from God, comment below, God has freed me. Yes, write with faith, and declare this as a milestone in your life. We on the channel will like your comment as a way of recognizing your spiritual commitment, and we will pray for everyone who is in this process of restoration. This is your moment to take a stand. Now take a deep breath. What follows may be just what you need to see clearly why certain people never stuck around. Don't leave now. The next minute could completely change the way you look at all of this. It's hard to admit that what we call love, in many cases, was disguised control. But the truth is that not all care is pure, and not all concern comes from a healthy place. Sometimes what we interpret as a demonstration of affection is actually a subtle way of manipulating, of holding you back, of molding you to the other person's expectations. And when we are emotionally needy, we confuse this dynamic with love. We accept emotional crumbs as if they were banquets. And the worst part, we start to call this normal. Lucas went through this. For a long time, he believed that excessive jealousy was a sign of love, that the constant demands were because the person cared, that the inner discomfort was just drama on his part. He gradually lost his sense of self. He stopped talking to friends, distanced himself from his family, put his dreams aside, and began to revolve around the other person. All this while believing that he was experiencing true love. But what seemed like affection was domination, and what seemed like care was control. This distortion is more common than it seems. The line between love and imprisonment can be very thin when spiritual discernment is dulled. And that is exactly where the enemy infiltrates, in relationships where emotional dependence grows more than mutual respect. He knows that if he can keep you trapped in a toxic relationship, you will disconnect from God's purpose. Because an oppressed soul does not hear the voice of heaven clearly. The Bible provides an emblematic example of this dynamic in the story of Samson and Delilah. Delilah entered Samson's life with affection, charm, and sweet words. She did not arrive as an enemy. She presented herself as someone worthy of trust. But her real goal was to undermine his strength, discover his vulnerability, and control his destiny. And the scariest thing, Samson knew, he suspected, but he was so emotionally involved that he ignored the signs, and he paid a very high price. Judges 16. How many times do we also ignore the signs? Those little attitudes that cause discomfort, but we justify. The words that belittle us, but we call them a joke. The impositions that suffocate, but that we pretend to accept in the name of love. Until the bond becomes a prison, and you can no longer recognize yourself. Your tastes change. Your dreams disappear. Your voice fades away. That is why God, in His mercy, often needs to intervene. He breaks bonds that you have not yet had the strength to break. He takes the person away, ends cycles, closes doors, and you suffer because your heart was involved. But God was seeing what you did not see. He saw how it was leading you astray, how your faith was weakening, how your identity was being swallowed up by a false love. But God is not a God of prison. He is a God of freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. 2 Corinthians 3:17. And where there is true love, there is no manipulation. There is room to grow. There is encouragement. There is respect. True love does not control. It liberates, it supports, it builds. It never demands that you put yourself down in order to be accepted. If you are in this type of relationship or have been in one, you may have difficulty seeing what really happened because your mind tries to romanticize it. It tries to hold on to the good times. But when you stop and analyze it honestly, you realize the weight you were carrying. You realize that you were constantly justifying yourself, explaining yourself, molding yourself to fit a mold that was never yours. And God wants to free you from this. He wants to restore your voice, your value, your essence. But to do so, you need to cut the bond that holds you back. And this cut may come suddenly. It may hurt, it may seem unfair, but it is liberating. Because what He has for you will never oppress you. It will strengthen you. It will elevate you. Don't blame yourself for believing. Don't be ashamed for having surrendered. Believe. God will use even this experience to strengthen you. You will come out of this more spiritually sensitive. You will learn to recognize the signs more clearly. You will grow in discernment. And above all, you will understand that true love begins with God's love for you. And it is this love that He wants to teach you to recognize. Not the love that sucks, that holds, that demands, but the love that heals, that frees, that restores identity. A love that does not nullify you, it reveals you. There comes a time in the healing process when pain gives way to understanding. The heart no longer bleeds as it did before because the mind begins to understand what once seemed unjustifiable. It's as if the pieces begin to fit together. Forgotten details return with new meaning. Words that once seemed innocent now sound like warnings. Attitudes that caused discomfort begin to make sense, and you realize God was showing me the whole time. This moment is subtle, but transformative. It is not an audible response, nor a spectacular vision. It is a clarity that descends like a revelation. You look back and no longer see the relationship in the same way. What you called love, you now understand as dependence. What seemed like friendship now shows itself as a negative influence. What you tried to hold on to at all costs, you now recognize as something that needs to go. And when this understanding comes, liberation begins. Because it is not just about the physical separation of the person, but the emotional and spiritual liberation that comes with understanding. As long as you still want to go back, still seek explanations, still suffer for the end, the soul remains trapped. But when you understand deliverance, when you understand that God was protecting you, you are free. The prodigal son went through a similar process. He left his father's house believing he was ready. He wanted independence, freedom, and a new life. But over time, he lost everything. And it was only there among the pigs that he came to his senses. That expression is powerful. He came to his senses. He understood. He woke up. It was not an external revelation. It was an internal transformation. And this awareness was the first step toward restoration. Luke 15:17. This is what God wants for us. That pain be transformed into wisdom. That loss be a starting point, not a place of paralysis. That awareness arrives, even if late, to free the soul from that which no longer serves. God does not want you to simply survive pain. He wants you to grow through it. And for that, understanding is essential. When you understand, you stop blaming. You stop idealizing. You stop humiliating yourself. You recognize that even though you love someone, it was necessary to leave. Even though it hurt, it was the best thing to do. Even though there were no answers, it was the right thing to do. And that changes everything. The weight is lifted from your shoulders. Crying turns into sincere prayer. Revolt dissolves into gratitude, not because the person left, but because you were freed. The truth, no matter how hard it is, always sets you free. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. It is not the comfortable lie that heals. It is the painful truth that transforms. And when you allow yourself to face that truth without masks, without excuses, without fantasies, the healing begins. Sometimes this understanding comes after much pain, after setbacks, failed attempts, and tossed and turned nights. But when it arrives, it comes with force. It's as if God whispers in your spirit, "Now you see." And this seeing changes everything. You start to position yourself differently. You no longer allow memories to enslave you. You no longer accept any word as truth. You no longer blame yourself for not being able to hold on to something that God Himself took from your hands. This is a new spiritual level. It is when you begin to walk with discernment, not neediness, with wisdom, not desperation, with peace, not urgency. You learn to observe yourself, to notice the patterns that led you there, to identify the emotional triggers, the voids that made you accept crumbs, and then you decide, never again. This decision does not come with hatred, it comes with freedom. You do not wish harm on anyone. You simply do not accept being a prisoner of bonds that separate you from God. And this position pleases heaven because it is a sign of maturity, a sign that you are ready to receive something new, something that does not destroy you inside, something that adds to you. The moment you understand what God has done, you also understand who you are. And that is the turning point. Because before, your identity was mixed up with the presence of the other person. Now your identity is anchored in God. You remember your dreams again, your convictions, your limits, your mission, and that is liberating. You realize that you didn't need anyone's approval to be whole. You didn't need that person's presence to be loved. You didn't need that bond to feel safe. All of this was already available in God from the beginning. You just didn't see it, but now you see it, and because of that, now you begin to truly live. You've just been on a deep journey of reflection, and now it's time to look at it all with fresh eyes. Throughout this video, we understand that the pain of losing someone, no matter how unfair it may seem, is often the beginning of the healing that God is working. Absence is not always rejection. Sometimes it is divine protection in the face of something you cannot yet see. God's silence is not abandonment. It is the most subtle and loving way He uses to reposition you. Certain bonds are cut not because you failed, but because God decided it was time to free your soul. And that true love begins when you reconnect with your identity in God, not with what others expect of you. If you've come this far, it's because there's a seed of discernment being awakened within you. Maybe you felt trapped by something that was silently consuming you. Maybe you've cried over a separation that now begins to make sense. Now listen carefully. If you feel that this word was for you, that today a key turned inside you, then declare it courageously in the comments. God took me out to save me. Write this with faith. This sentence is more than a comment. It is a spiritual position. And we here on the channel will leave a like on your comment as a sign that you are not alone on this journey. We will also pray for all who declare this truth boldly. And if you are truly committed to this process of healing and growth, subscribe to the channel now. Here each video is a nudge from God in the right direction, a breath of clarity in the quiet moments, a reminder of how loved and cared for you are, even when everything seems to be falling apart. Before you leave, answer this. What was the code that turned the key inside you? Comment below. We want to know which part spoke to your heart the most. And if this video really reached you, share with as many people as possible. Be an instrument of liberation in someone's life, just as this word was a blessing for you. Be generous. You have been blessed, so bless other lives. And now it doesn't stop here. On the screen, there is 2 essential videos for your transformation journey. Each of them is a continuation of this conversation with God. Watch them both because they contain the next pieces that will complete this spiritual puzzle. You have already distinguished yourself as someone who seeks something greater. Now it's time to show that you're different, that you don't ignore the signs, that you don't back down, that you're for real. Let's go together until the end. God has taken you away from what was making you sick and is leading you to something infinitely better. It all starts with a decision, and you've already taken the first step. Now, keep walking. Comment now. God took me out to save me. Subscribe to the channel. Watch the 2 videos that are appearing on your screen. See you there. You are not alone. You never have been, and you never will be.